This is a tale of intellectual confrontation, where questions will be raised, arguments will be presented, and the search for truth will unfold. Welcome to Legacy of Islam, where reason, faith, and evidence shine bright. If you want to spread the light of knowledge, research, and truth, then like the video, share it, and subscribe to Legacy of Islam. The National University of Uruguay Hall was packed with students from various departments, all gathered with burning curiosity. Some had come to hear the opinion of a famous professor, while others were simply looking for entertainment. In the middle of the large hall stood a 56-year-old man with a confident expression, Dr. Fernando Alvarez, a well-known professor of philosophy. He was famous for his vocal criticism of religion, especially Islam. Dressed in a neat black suit with glasses perched on his nose, he smiled slightly, ready to begin his public lecture. Among the students was an 18-year-old Muslim girl named Nayla Rodriguez, sitting in the front row with full attention. A new student in the law department, Nayla was known for her intelligence, politeness, and steadfast faith. That day, Dr. Fernando chose a particularly controversial topic: myths and dogmas in human beliefs. With a condescending tone, he began his lecture. Today, we will discuss how many people still believe in things that defy logic. Take, for example, the so-called journey of Isra and Miraj. Can someone really ascend to the sky in one night? Doesn't this sound more like a fairy tale than a historical fact? Some students chuckled, while others grew restless. Nayla, who had been listening intently, clenched her fists under the table. She hadn't expected a professor, who was supposed to be scientific, to speak so dismissively. What you believe in without scientific evidence is nothing more than a lie. Fernando continued. I have read many religious books, and all of them contain nothing but fictional stories. Those who still believe in such things should reconsider their views. The room stirred. Several Muslim students exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to respond. Then, in the midst of the silence, Nayla finally raised her hand. Her voice was calm but firm. Professor, if you claim our beliefs are mere myths, may I ask you some questions? Fernando smirked and folded his arms. Go ahead. I like students who think critically. Nayla knew this wasn't just an ordinary debate, it was about her faith. She had to respond with facts and reasoning. The room suddenly fell silent. All eyes were on her, the young Muslim girl who had just challenged Dr. Fernando Alvarez. Some students watched with curiosity, while others looked at Nayla anxiously, knowing that this professor was not easy to counter. Fernando leaned back slightly, lifting his chin. All right, Nayla. What do you want to ask? She met his gaze with confidence. Professor, earlier you said that Isra and Miraj is a myth. But I want to ask, how can you be so certain that something is impossible just because it can't be explained by current science? Fernando chuckled. Because science is the only way we can understand the world. If something can't be proven scientifically, then it's just a fictional story. Nayla nodded thoughtfully. All right. If that's the case, let's talk about science. Do you believe in Einstein's theory of relativity? Fernando raised an eyebrow. Of course. It's one of the greatest achievements in modern physics. A small smile appeared on Nayla's lips. Then what about the concept of time dilation in the theory? It explains that under certain conditions, time can slow down or even stop. Fernando narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing where the conversation was going. Yes, at speeds approaching the speed of light, time moves slower than in other places. But what does that have to do with the Isra and Miraj event? Nayla remained calm. If science itself acknowledges that time is relative, why do you reject the possibility that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, could have experienced time differently in a way that we don't yet understand? For a moment, the room fell into deep silence. The students who had only been passively listening now paid full attention. Fernando let out a soft chuckle. So, you're saying that Prophet Muhammad traveled through space at near light speed? That doesn't make sense. There is no historical or scientific evidence to support such a claim. Naila was undeterred. Professor, have you ever heard of the twin experiment in the study of time relativity? Fernando nodded. Yes. The experiment states that if two twins exist, one remaining on Earth while the other travels at near light speed, the traveler would return younger than his brother who remained on Earth. Naila smiled. Then, was there anyone in ancient times who could understand this concept before science discovered it? Fernando was silent for a moment. Of course not. It was only discovered by Einstein in the 20th century. Naila leaned forward slightly, her eyes serious. But in the Isra and Miraj incident, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, traveled in one night, while people on Earth did not experience the same time difference. This aligns with the principle of time dilation in Einstein's relativity. How could a man in the 7th century understand a concept that was only discovered more than 1,000 years later? Fernando's smile began to fade. He hadn't expected a new student to present such a strong argument. The other students started whispering among themselves, some nodding in admiration at Naila's logic. But Fernando wasn't ready to concede just yet. He sighed and said, "Okay, let's assume your argument makes sense. But what about the other part? Are you really suggesting that creatures called angels took him to the sky? That sounds more like a fairy tale than science." Naila remained calm, but her tone deepened. "Professor, do you believe in dark matter and dark energy?" Fernando nodded. "Of course. It's a concept in modern physics that explains most of the mass of the universe, things we cannot see." Naila smiled. "But can you see it?" Fernando was silent for a moment before replying. "No, but we can observe its effects on gravity and the movement of galaxies." Naila nodded. "So you believe in something you can't see, just because its effects can be measured?" The room grew even quieter. Fernando hesitated, and this time, the whispers among the students grew louder. Some looked at the professor with curiosity, waiting for his response. Naila continued, "In Islam, we believe that angels are beings we cannot see, but their existence has an effect on this world, just like dark energy. Their presence can be felt even though they cannot be observed with the naked eye." Fernando took a deep breath. "You are comparing religious beliefs with modern science. It's not the same thing." Naila smiled slightly. "Professor, science continues to evolve. People used to believe the Earth was flat until science proved otherwise. People once laughed at the theory of radio waves, yet now we use them every day. What if there are things in religion that science can't explain today, but one day they will be proven?" Fernando didn't answer immediately. He looked at Naila differently, not with disdain, but as someone who was starting to reconsider something new. However, as a senior academic, he wasn't going to admit defeat so easily. "Well," he said, "maybe some of your points make sense. But what about prayer? Why do you have to prostrate 5 times a day? Isn't it just a meaningless ritual?" Naila met his gaze without hesitation. "Professor, you know that many scientific studies have proven the benefits of meditation and certain body positions for health and mental well-being. Prostration in prayer is not just an act of worship, it has incredible physiological effects. When a person prostrates, blood flow to the brain increases, improving concentration and mental clarity. Some studies even show that the prostration position can help reduce stress and enhance emotional balance." Fernando narrowed his eyes. "So you're saying that prayer is science?" Naila smiled. "I'm saying that Islam is in harmony with science. There are many things we only understand thousands of years later. The problem is, people reject something simply because they don't understand it." The tension in the room had reached its peak. Students who initially saw the debate as mere entertainment were now deeply engaged. Some looked at Naila with admiration, while others turned to Fernando, waiting to see how he would respond. Fernando stared at Naila for a long time. He knew he was facing someone who was not only intelligent but also deeply rooted in her beliefs. But as an academic who had spent years rejecting religion, he wasn't ready to back down so easily. With a slightly lower voice than before, he said, "You are indeed smart, Nayla. But I'm not finished. There are still many things." Nayla smiled slightly and said, "I am ready, Professor. I am not here to win or lose, but to find the truth." Fernando raised his eyebrows, slightly surprised by her answer. He was used to dealing with people who only wanted to prove themselves right, but this girl was different. Before he could reply, the bell signaling the end of class rang. The students, who had been tense, began to breathe a sigh of relief. Some of them immediately crowded around Nayla, eager to ask her more questions, while Fernando remained standing where he was, staring at the girl thoughtfully. He knew this was not over. Fernando sat in his office, his expression unusually pensive. Students who knew him were accustomed to seeing him confident, always armed with sharp arguments that were difficult to refute. But today, his thoughts were different. He kept replaying the debate in his mind. Nayla had forced him to think deeper. Her arguments were stronger than he had anticipated. He never expected a new student to challenge his beliefs with such a different perspective. "Maybe I've been too arrogant," he admitted to himself. But as a senior academic, his ego and prestige did not allow him to concede so easily. Fernando snorted softly, trying to reassure himself. "No, this is just a coincidence. She must have prepared herself well beforehand," he thought. But the more he tried to convince himself, the more his mind fixated on the previous debate. How could the Prophet Muhammad understand a concept that was only discovered over 1,000 years later? The question continued to haunt him. He was used to facing students who questioned atheism, but Nayla was different. Fernando closed his eyes for a moment, then reached for his laptop. He typed into the search engine, "Theory of Relativity and Religion." Several articles appeared, some from scientific journals, others from blogs and personal opinions. Fernando clicked on one and read it carefully. The article discussed how some concepts in religion, especially Islam, align with modern science. Fernando frowned. This only deepened his confusion. He wanted to refute it, but every time he tried, he found himself drawn into learning more. Not long after, there was a knock on his office door. "Professor, may I come in?" Fernando turned to see Nayla standing at the doorway. He was slightly surprised but quickly masked his reaction. "Please," he answered briefly. Nayla entered with steady steps. Her face remained calm, but curiosity gleamed in her eyes. "I want to continue our discussion if the professor allows," she said. Fernando closed his laptop and looked at Nayla. "You weren't satisfied with the argument earlier?" Nayla shook her head. "That's not it. I just feel that we haven't finished everything. There are still many things left to discuss." Fernando snorted slightly. "I thought you were satisfied with your argument earlier. Do you want to convince me to become a Muslim?" Nayla smiled faintly. "I can't force anyone, Professor. Truth must be found, not forced." Fernando was taken aback by her answer. So far, he had assumed that religious people always wanted to impose their beliefs on others. But this girl was different. "All right," said Fernando. "What do you want to discuss?" Nayla sat down and said, "Professor, you strongly believe in science. But don't you think that science cannot explain everything?" Fernando smiled sarcastically. "That's because science is still developing. It's only a matter of time before we can explain everything." Nayla nodded. "So the professor believes that there are still many things in this world that remain unexplained?" Fernando fell silent, realizing the logical trap within Nayla's question. If he answered, yes, he would have to admit that religion might hold truths beyond human comprehension. If he answered, no, he would be implying that science was already perfect, which was clearly not the case. After a brief internal struggle, he finally exhaled and admitted, "Yes, there are still many things that science cannot explain." Nayla smiled. "That is why I believe there is a power greater than human reason alone. Islam does not contradict science. In fact, many Islamic teachings align with scientific discoveries. The real problem is that people often reject what they do not understand." Fernando remained silent. He couldn't immediately refute her statement. But then, a different thought crossed his mind, one that had always troubled him. "What about justice in religion?" he finally asked. "If God exists, why is there so much suffering in this world?" Nayla looked at him calmly. "Professor, do you believe that challenges help people grow? That difficulties make us stronger?" Fernando frowned slightly but nodded. "Of course. Humans develop through adversity." Nayla's smile deepened. "That is exactly the concept in Islam. Life is a test, and every test has a purpose. Just because we don't always understand the reason behind an event doesn't mean there isn't one." Fernando felt an internal struggle brewing. Her argument was difficult to dismiss. Before he could formulate a counterpoint, Nayla gently interrupted his thoughts. "Professor, may I ask you something personal?" Fernando hesitated but then nodded. Nayla looked at him curiously. "Have you always had this view of religion, or was there something in your life that made you reject it?" Fernando was caught off guard. Her question was sharp, cutting straight to something he had buried deep for a long time. He remained silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice softer than before. "I grew up in a non-religious environment. I saw a lot of hypocrisy from people who claimed to be religious. It made me believe that religion was just a tool to manipulate others." Nayla listened attentively, giving him space to continue. "My father was a scientist. He always told me that science could explain everything, and I believed him. Until now, I never felt that my views were flawed." Fernando paused, as if debating whether to go on. Then, with a deep breath, he confessed, "But there's one thing that has always bothered me." Nayla waited patiently. "I lost someone I loved very much," Fernando finally said, his voice tinged with emotion. "My mother." Nayla's expression softened with empathy. "She was a good person," he continued. "But I couldn't accept it when she died. I couldn't understand why someone so kind had to suffer so much." After a moment, Nayla finally spoke. "Professor, I can't imagine the pain of your loss. But have you ever considered the possibility of life after death?" Fernando let out a bitter laugh. "That's just wishful thinking." Nayla remained unfazed. "Or perhaps it's simply something we haven't been able to prove scientifically yet. Just like dark energy was once unknown to us, maybe there are greater realities beyond our current understanding." Fernando fell silent, her words weighing heavily on him. For the first time in his life, he felt doubt, not about science, but about the certainty of his own beliefs. Was it possible that he had been wrong all along? The office felt eerily quiet. This debate was no longer just an intellectual exercise, it was about something deeper. A search for truth. And in that moment, Fernando realized that Nayla's words had stirred something inside him, something he wasn't ready to face. His laptop screen remained open, but his mind was no longer focused on the articles before him. Instead, it wrestled with the last conversation he had with Nayla. The foundation of his thinking, the one he had always believed to be unshakable, had just been shaken. Could there be truth in what she said? Fernando tried to push the thought away, clinging to the belief that science was the only path to truth. But deep inside, doubt had already begun to take root. But the more Fernando tried to dismiss it, the deeper the doubt crept into his mind. If I've been wrong all this time, then everything I've believed in will collapse. But if I'm right, why do I feel so restless? He took a deep breath and decided to reread some of the theories about the relativity of time and the concept of dimensional travel, ideas he had previously used to reject the possibility of Isra and Miraj. But this time, he looked at them from a different perspective. He found that some modern theories could actually support the concept of extraordinary travel described in Islam. Einstein's theory of relativity, the concept of wormholes, and even hypotheses about higher dimensions all seem to open up the possibility that what many considered impossible might actually be true. Fernando exhaled sharply. So this wasn't just a myth? The thought kept spinning in his head until he realized someone was standing at the door of his office. Professor Fernando looked up and saw a man about his age leaning against the doorway, Dr. Javier Morales. Javier was his academic colleague, a professor of philosophy, and a staunch atheist. Fernando gave a thin smile. "Javier, come in." Javier walked in and sat down across from him, his sharp gaze fixed on Fernando. "I heard you were just humiliated by a Muslim student in front of the class," he said with a mocking tone. Fernando frowned. "I wouldn't call it humiliation. It was just an academic debate." Javier chuckled sarcastically. "Fernando, I've known you for more than 20 years. You've always been the smartest person in the room. But this time, even your students are saying that the girl managed to make you speechless." Fernando was silent for a moment. He knew Javier hadn't come just to mock him. "What are you really trying to say, Javier?" he asked finally. Javier leaned back in his chair, studying his friend. "I wonder, was it just an ordinary debate, or did something in that girl's words really get to you?" Fernando stared at him for a long moment. Javier had always been able to read his thoughts. "I don't know, Javier," he admitted. "Some of the things she said, they're hard to ignore." Javier raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to doubt your own beliefs?" Fernando shook his head. "No, but I am starting to wonder if maybe there are things that science alone can't explain." Javier scoffed. "Fernando, you already know the answer. Of course, there are things science can't explain. But that doesn't mean we have to bring God into the equation." Fernando sighed. "That's what I always thought too. But Nayla didn't just talk about God. She connected science to something bigger. And to my surprise, some of what she said had a scientific basis." Javier studied him for a long moment before clicking his tongue. "So the girl really shook you, huh?" Fernando didn't answer, but his silence spoke for itself. Javier took a deep breath. "Listen to me carefully, Fernando. I know you're a logical person, so let's think logically. If you're starting to consider this girl's arguments, ask yourself, are you truly starting to believe in God, or is this just the after effect of an emotional argument?" Fernando fell silent. He knew this was the heart of his doubts. "I don't know the answer," he finally admitted. Javier smirked. "Okay. But I'll remind you of one thing. Don't let a young girl who's only studied philosophy for 2 years shake everything you've built over decades." Fernando gave a small smile. "Javier, you know I'm not easily influenced." Javier laughed. "That's exactly what worries me. Because if you waver, then that means she must have a really strong argument." After Javier left, Fernando remained seated in his chair, deep in thought. He knew this debate wasn't over. He had to meet Nayla again. A few days later, Fernando invited Nayla to his office. When she arrived, he was prepared with many questions. But before he could speak, Nayla spoke first. "Professor, I want to ask you something before we continue our discussion." Fernando nodded. "Go ahead." Nayla looked at him seriously. "Professor, are you searching for the truth, or do you just want to win the debate?" Fernando was caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Nayla smiled softly. "I mean, if you're truly searching for the truth, then it shouldn't matter whether it aligns with your previous beliefs or not. But if you only want to win the debate, then we'll never get to the real answer." Fernando sat in silence for a long time. Then, he realized something. His entire life, he had always wanted to prove that he was right. But did he truly want the truth? Finally, in a soft voice, he answered. Fernando took a deep breath and spoke in a quiet voice. "I want to know the truth." Nayla smiled gently. Okay, then let's continue. Fernando looked at her intently. You once said that Islam does not contradict science. Can you explain further? Nayla nodded. Professor, you must be aware that many Muslim scientists in the past were pioneers of science, figures like Ibn Sina, Al-Khwarizmi, and Al-Biruni. They did not see religion as a barrier but rather as a motivation to understand the universe. Fernando nodded. He was familiar with their contributions, but what intrigued him more was the connection Nayla was making. What's even more interesting, she continued, is how scientific concepts have been present in the Qur'an for centuries. One such example is the event of Isra and Miraj. Fernando leaned back in his chair. I still find it hard to accept. How could someone make such a journey in a single night? Nayla smiled. Professor, you believe in the theory of relativity, don't you? Fernando nodded. Then you must know that time is relative. It can move faster or slower depending on gravity and speed, she explained. If someone moves at a speed close to light, time slows down for them compared to someone who remains on Earth. Fernando stared at her, beginning to grasp where she was going with this. So if someone experiences a journey that surpasses our current understanding of physics, Nayla continued, is it not possible that they experience time differently? What feels like one night to us might be something entirely different for the traveler. Fernando sat in silence, deep in thought. He couldn't deny that his mind was now filled with possibilities he had never considered before. Could it be that he had been shutting himself off from something greater all along? The room fell into stillness. For the first time in his life, Fernando felt as though he was no longer the smartest person in the room. After their conversation, Fernando found his office eerily quiet. His mind couldn't escape the weight of their discussion. The biggest question of his life now loomed over him. Had he been rejecting something true simply because of his own ego? He rubbed his face, then pulled out several books from his shelf, books on science, philosophy, and Islamic history. He had once read these with the sole purpose of finding faults in religion. But now, he read them with a different perspective. Gazing out the window, he pondered deeply. If I accept that the Isra and Miraj might have happened, does that mean I must also accept that there is a power greater than science can explain? A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Professor? Fernando looked up to see Nayla standing at the doorway, her expression calm and composed. Come in, he said. She walked in and took a seat across from him. A moment of silence stretched between them before Fernando finally spoke. I've thought about everything you said, Nayla, he admitted softly. Nayla remained patient, waiting for him to continue. He took a deep breath. I can't ignore the fact that many things I once thought were incompatible with science actually have a strong correlation with it. Nayla smiled. So, Professor, have you found the answer you were looking for? Fernando stared at her, his eyes full of uncertainty. I don't know if I'm ready to accept everything yet. But I can no longer deny that there is something greater than I had ever imagined. That's a good start, Nayla responded gently. He looked at her with confusion. But if that's true, why do so many people reject Islam? Why have I been so stubborn all this time? Nayla sighed. Because the truth is heavy, Professor. It takes courage to accept it. Sometimes, ego and fear make people reject it, not because the truth is wrong, but because they aren't ready to change their lives to embrace it. Fernando fell into silence. Her words struck him deeply. Finally, he asked, What makes you so sure of all this, Nayla? The girl smiled gently. Professor, Islam is not just a theory or a set of thoughts. It is my way of life. I do not believe in it simply because I have read or heard about it. I believe because I feel it in my heart. Fernando swallowed hard. There was something in her words that struck a deep chord within him, making his chest feel tight. He hesitated before asking, How can I know if I'm on the right path? Nayla met his gaze with soft eyes. Professor, sometimes the answer is not something you can find with reason alone. It must be felt. If your heart is still restless, maybe it's a sign that something remains unresolved. And perhaps the only way to find that answer is to humble yourself, open your heart, and seek with sincerity. Fernando let out a small chuckle, but his eyes glistened with emotion. So, you're saying I need to pray? Nayla nodded. If you truly want to know, why not try? There's no harm in it, right? He took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, he considered something he had never thought possible before. A few days later, Fernando strolled through the university park, his steps slow and contemplative. Finding an empty wooden bench, he sat down, allowing the gentle breeze to touch his face. All his life, he had searched for the truth through intellect, never through his heart. He recalled Nayla's words and, after a moment of hesitation, lowered his head. Quietly, he whispered, "If you exist, show me the right way." He did not expect an immediate revelation, nor did he anticipate a grand sign. Yet, in that moment, he felt something light within his chest, as if an unseen burden was slowly lifting. Was it just his imagination? Or was it something more? Regardless, one thing was certain. This was the beginning of a new journey. Months later, Fernando stood before his class, looking at his students with a new sense of purpose. He was no longer the rigid professor who dismissed anything that contradicted his beliefs. "Today," he began, "we will not discuss religion and science as two opposing forces. Instead, we will explore how they can coexist, how they can complement one another." His students exchanged surprised glances at the shift in their professor's tone. From the front row, Nayla simply smiled. Fernando continued, "The truth does not always present itself in the way we expect. Sometimes, we must set aside our ego to find it." He glanced at Nayla. "And I learned that from someone I once thought was just another student." Nayla lowered her head humbly, while Fernando took a deep breath before saying, "Let's begin." That day, the usual heated debates in his classroom transformed into meaningful discussions, conversations filled with a genuine search for understanding. Because, in the end, truth is not about who is smarter or who wins the argument. It is about who seeks it with sincerity. Moral lessons. 1. The truth cannot always be found through logic alone. Sometimes, it must be felt with a sincere heart. 2. Ego and fear are often the greatest barriers to accepting the truth. 3. Science and religion are not enemies. They can complement each other when approached with an open mind. 4. The journey to truth requires courage. Sometimes, we must lower our pride and open our hearts to understand something greater than ourselves. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories of wisdom and inspiration. See you in the next video. At a prestigious university in Belgium, the atmosphere in the lecture hall was unusually tense. The philosophy course, typically a space for relaxed and insightful discussions, had now transformed into an arena for a fierce and unexpected debate. Standing confidently at the front of the room was Dr. Sadra, a well-known academic in the field of philosophy. Dressed neatly in an elegant black jacket, and wearing glasses, he was renowned for his critical and skeptical views on the existence of God. With a sharp yet controlled voice, he often provoked his students to think deeply, challenging them to question everything, including their faith. Among the students in the front row sat Ada, a 19-year-old Muslim student known for her intelligence and strong understanding of religion. Unlike many students who preferred to remain silent in the face of Dr. Sadra's probing questions, Ada never hesitated to speak her mind. That morning, Dr. Sadra began the class with a bold statement that immediately created a wave of tension. "Belief in God is a form of weakness," he declared. "People who still cling to religion do so only because they cannot accept the reality that this universe has no creator. Everything around us is governed by natural laws, operating independently without any divine intervention." A heavy silence fell over the class. Some students exchanged glances, Others smirked in agreement, while some looked unsure. But among them, Ada remained upright, her hands clasped tightly on the table. She knew this was not just an ordinary debate. Dr. Sadra's gaze swept across the room as he continued in a sharper tone. I challenge any of you to prove that God exists. Use logic, use reason, because science has never needed God to explain how the universe works. Ada took a deep breath, looking around at her fellow students. Many hesitated, avoiding eye contact, unwilling to engage in a debate that could be both difficult and exhausting. But she could not remain silent. Slowly, she raised her hand. A slight smirk appeared on Dr. Sadra's face, as if he had expected someone to take the bait. Go ahead, Ada, he said in a slightly mocking tone. I'm curious. Can you prove God's existence without relying on blind faith? Ada smiled faintly, meeting her professor's gaze with calm confidence. Before I answer your question, Dr. Sadra, may I ask you a simple question? The room grew even quieter. The students, who had been mere spectators until now, leaned in, intrigued by Ada's unexpected counter. Doctor, you often emphasize that everything must be scientifically proven, correct? She asked. Dr. Sadra nodded. Of course. That is the foundation of rational thinking. If something cannot be proven, it remains a mere assumption. Ada's smile deepened. All right then. Can you prove that you have consciousness? That you are, at this moment, thinking with free will? Dr. Sadra hesitated for a brief moment. A murmur spread through the class as students exchanged curious glances. It was clear that Ada's question was not an ordinary one. With a slight smile, Dr. Sadra replied, Consciousness is a result of neural activity in our brain. We have evidence that the brain generates thoughts and awareness through its electrical processes. Ada nodded. That's true, but that only explains the biological process. My question is, can you scientifically prove that your consciousness truly exists, beyond your own experience? Dr. Sadra frowned slightly, and the whispers in the class grew louder. Ada continued, her voice steady. You see, consciousness cannot be measured or observed in a laboratory experiment. It is a subjective experience, something that each individual knows exists but cannot physically prove. If we were to follow your logic, then we should not believe in consciousness either, because there is no absolute scientific evidence explaining its existence and nature. Yet we accept it, because we all experience it. Isn't that right, Doctor? A ripple of discussion spread through the room. Students who had previously remained silent now appeared deeply engaged. Dr. Sadra remained quiet for a moment before responding. Interesting. But consciousness can still be studied through neuroscience. God cannot. Ada nodded. That's because God is not a material entity to be placed under a microscope. However, the existence of God can be reasoned through logic and the intricate order of the universe. Just like consciousness, we may not see him directly, but we can witness his manifestations in everything around us. The classroom buzzed with conversation. Some students nodded in agreement, while others seemed to ponder Ada's reasoning. Dr. Sadra gave a slight smile. So Ada, tell me, how do you logically prove God's existence? Ada took a breath, preparing to explain further. But before she could speak, the lecture bell rang loudly, signaling the end of the session. A collective sigh of disappointment echoed through the room. Some students seemed eager for the discussion to continue. Dr. Sadra chuckled lightly. Well, it looks like we'll have to continue this debate in our next session. Ada, I hope you come prepared with an even stronger argument. Ada smiled confidently. Of course, Doctor. I will bring more logic and evidence. As students began to leave the room, many gathered around Ada, eager to hear more of her thoughts. Meanwhile, Dr. Sadra stood near the podium, watching her with a contemplative expression. Had he finally met a student who could truly challenge him in a philosophical debate? The discussion between Ada and Dr. Sadra sent ripples across campus. Many students engaged in conversations about faith and reason, some impressed by Ada's courage, while others remained skeptical, convinced that Dr. Sadra's logic was unshakable. But Ada knew this was only the beginning. Let's continue our debate from yesterday. Dr. Sadra said, folding his arms. Ada, you argue that God can be proven through logic and the order of nature. I want to hear more. Explain to me how this universe serves as proof of God's existence. The classroom fell silent. All eyes turned toward Ada. The young woman took a deep breath before speaking. Doctor, let me begin with a simple question. If you were walking in the woods and found a watch lying on the ground, what would you think? Dr. Sadra narrowed his eyes, trying to anticipate where the conversation was headed. I would assume that someone had dropped it there, he replied. Ada nodded. Exactly. You wouldn't think that the watch simply formed itself out of the ground, would you? Of course not, Dr. Sadra answered. A watch is a complex object. Clearly, it was designed and made by someone. Ada smiled. Then if we look at this universe, far more complex than a watch, why do we assume it came into existence without a creator? The class remained silent. Some students began whispering, impressed by Ada's analogy. Dr. Sadra chuckled. The classic watchmaker argument. But Ada, science has shown that the universe does not require a creator. We have the Big Bang Theory, which explains its origin, and the laws of physics that govern everything, without the need for divine intervention. Ada remained calm. All right, let's discuss the Big Bang. But before that, let's go back to a basic principle. Something cannot come from nothing. If there was a Big Bang, there must have been something to explode in the first place. Where did that initial matter come from? Dr. Sadra hesitated for a moment. Science explains what happened after the explosion, Ada continued, but it does not explain what caused it in the first place. Nor can science explain why the laws of physics are so precisely tuned. Why does gravity have its exact strength? Why are the constants of the universe arranged so perfectly that life is possible? This suggests an extraordinary design. The students started engaging in the discussion. Some nodded, beginning to understand Ada's argument. Dr. Sadra, however, still wore a confident smile. Your argument is interesting, Ada, but let's say a creator does exist. Then who created God? Ada smiled. Doctor, your question assumes that God is bound by the same rules as the universe. But God exists beyond space and time. Only things that have a beginning require a creator. God has no beginning and no end. He is not part of the cause and effect system that governs the universe. Dr. Sadra squinted, deep in thought. The students, too, seemed captivated by the debate. But before Dr. Sadra could respond, a student raised his hand. Ada, I have a question, he said. If God exists, why is there so much suffering in the world? If he is good, why does he allow wars and tragedies? Several students nodded, as if this was the hardest question yet. Dr. Sadra leaned back, smiling. Now this is an interesting question. Ada, how do you explain this? Ada took a deep breath, then looked directly at the student. I will answer that. But first, let me ask you, do you believe that humans have free will? The student nodded. Of course. Ada smiled. Then that means humans have the ability to choose between good and evil. God did not create evil. He gave humans the freedom to choose. If we were forced to always do good, we would not truly be free. We would be like robots, programmed without our own will. The student looked thoughtful. And about suffering, Ada continued, we often see it as a bad thing. But many hardships actually lead to goodness. A sick person appreciates health more. Someone who experiences loss understands the value of love. Suffering can be a path to growth and learning. If this world were perfect and free of challenges, we would never develop as human beings. Dr. Sadra listened carefully, not answering right away. The entire class was silent, waiting for his reaction. After a few moments, he smiled slightly. Ada, you have presented an interesting argument, he admitted. But I have one final question for today. Ada nodded. I'm ready to hear it. If God is real and all-powerful, why doesn't he reveal himself to us directly, so that everyone would believe without a doubt? The question hung in the air, making the students pause. Ada looked at Dr. Sadra and smiled. She knew that this was the core of the debate. With full confidence, she prepared to respond. If God showed himself clearly to everyone, she began, faith would no longer be a choice. Everyone would believe, not because they sincerely sought the truth, but because they had no other option. Would that really be faith? The classroom filled with whispers. Some students nodded, grasping the logic behind her words. Dr. Sadra folded his arms. So you're saying that God wants to test humans by remaining unseen? Ada smiled. Not hiding, Doctor. God does not hide. He has given us countless signs of his existence. The laws of physics, the order of the cosmos, the wonders of life, these are all signs for those who seek the truth. If God appeared directly, there would be no room for free will. But now, people have the choice to believe or deny. A student at the back hesitantly raised his hand. But if God gives signs, why do so many people still not believe? If the signs are so clear, shouldn't everyone accept God's existence? Ada nodded slowly. That is the difference between those who seek the truth and those who refuse it. If someone closes their eyes in broad daylight, is it fair to say that the sun does not exist? The problem is not the absence of light, but the refusal to see it. The class fell silent once again. Dr. Sadra smiled slightly, acknowledging the strength of Ada's argument. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. All right, Ada, he said. Let's discuss something even more fundamental. You believe that God is all-just and all-merciful, correct? Of course, Ada affirmed. Dr. Sadra leaned forward slightly. Then why are there so many religions in the world? If God is truly just and merciful, why didn't he give humanity just one clear religion? Why doesn't God just give one clear religion so that people don't have to struggle and be confused about which one is right? Some students seemed intrigued by this question. The diversity of religions had always been a topic of debate. If there is only one God, why are there so many different ways to worship him? Ada paused for a moment before responding. Doctor, religious diversity is not proof that God is unclear. On the contrary, it is part of the test for humanity. Since the beginning, God has sent many prophets and messengers with the same core message, to worship the one true God. But over time, people altered these teachings, mixing them with their own traditions and ideas. Dr. Sadra raised an eyebrow. So, are you saying that only your religion is true? Ada remained calm. It's not me who says that, Doctor. But let's look at this honestly. If we study the scriptures of various religions, we find that their original message was always about monotheism, the worship of one God. However, humans tend to distort those teachings. In Islam, we believe that the religion taught from Prophet Adam to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them, has always been one and the same, submission to God. But over time, people changed the teachings, which led to the formation of different religions. Some students began discussing among themselves. The debate was getting deeper, and more people were becoming interested in Ada's argument. Dr. Sadra sighed. This time, he seemed more serious. All right, Ada, I have to admit that your argument is strong. But let's look at this from a practical perspective. If Islam is the true religion, why do we still see so many Muslims doing bad things? Why is there terrorism, corruption, and injustice in Muslim-majority countries? Doesn't that prove that this religion does not necessarily bring positive change? Other students nodded in agreement. This was a common argument raised by skeptics. Ada took a deep breath before responding. Doctor, I understand where this question comes from. But let's think logically. If a doctor prescribes medicine to heal a patient, but the patient refuses to take it, can we blame the doctor? Dr. Sadra narrowed his eyes, beginning to see the direction of the argument. Islam is a perfect guide for life, Ada continued, but not all Muslims follow its teachings correctly. There are people who call themselves Muslims but do not understand or even ignore the principles of Islam. Their mistakes are not the fault of Islam, just as a patient's refusal to take medicine is not the fault of the doctor. If we want to judge something, we must evaluate it based on its original teachings, not based on the actions of those who claim to follow it. The class fell silent. Even students who had initially sided with Dr. Sadra now appeared to be deep in thought. Ada's argument was logical and difficult to refute. But Dr. Sadra still had one final question. He knew that the debate was reaching its climax, and if he wanted to challenge Ada effectively, he had to deliver a decisive blow. Looking directly at Ada, he said, "Ada, I must admit that you have a sharp mind. But there is one question you haven't answered. If Islam is true, why are there still so many intelligent people in the world who choose to be atheists? Why do brilliant scientists, people with access to vast knowledge, reject the existence of God?" The atmosphere in the classroom grew tense. This was the final question. If Ada failed to answer it convincingly, her entire argument could collapse. The girl met the professor's gaze with confidence. She knew this was the most crucial moment in the debate. With a calm voice, she replied, "Doctor, intelligence does not always equate to truth. Even the most brilliant minds can be mistaken. A scientist may understand the laws of physics perfectly, but that does not mean he understands the purpose of life or the meaning of human existence." She continued, "Science explains how things work, but it cannot explain why they exist. There are many scientists who believe in God and many who do not. The difference is not in the evidence but in perspective. Even the most intelligent people have the freedom to believe or reject. True wisdom is not just about acquiring knowledge, it's about understanding the deeper meaning behind it." The class sat in silence, waiting for Dr. Sadra's reaction. But for the first time, the professor had no immediate response. Dr. Sadra looked at Ada with an expression that was difficult to read. It was as if something in her words had unsettled him, shaking the foundation of his long-held beliefs. The entire class sat in complete silence, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Dr. Sadra, usually so quick and confident in his responses, remained still, his face reflecting an internal struggle. Something within him was stirring. Ada, calm and composed, remained seated. She knew that this debate was not about winning or losing, it was about the pursuit of truth. It was about demonstrating that logic and faith could coexist. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Sadra took a deep breath, leaned back in his chair, and looked at Ada with eyes no longer filled with disdain. "You've made me think," he admitted softly. Ada smiled slightly. "That's a good start, Doctor. Truth is only found by those who are willing to think and search with an open heart." Dr. Sadra studied her carefully. "I've spent years studying philosophy and science, trying to prove that religion is merely a social construct. But there's something different about your perspective. You don't just speak with logic, you speak with conviction, a determination I rarely see." Some students who had initially dismissed Ada now looked at her with admiration. They began to realize that they had accepted their beliefs unquestioningly, never truly exploring where those beliefs had come from. Ada spoke gently. "Doctor, I'm not asking you to believe right away. I only ask that you consider the possibility that there is a greater truth, one that human reason alone cannot fully grasp. Science is incredible, but it has its limits. And it is at those limits where faith takes over." Dr. Sadra sighed, his voice tinged with emotion. "You know, Ada, I once believed in God too. I was born into a religious family. But as I delved deeper into philosophy, I found so many contradictions in religion. I saw injustice, wars fought in the name of God, endless suffering. And I asked myself, where is God in all of this? Over time, I began to believe that maybe God was just an illusion, something humans created for comfort." The class listened intently. For the first time, Dr. Sadra was opening up about his past in a way he never had before. Ada's eyes softened with empathy. "I understand, Doctor. Many people struggle with those same questions. When they see suffering and evil, they begin to doubt God's existence. But that's why it's important to understand religion deeply. If we look at history, most wars and conflicts aren't caused by religion itself but by people who misuse religion for their own agendas." Dr. Sadra was silent, absorbing her words. Ada continued, "It's like a knife, Doctor. A knife can be used to cook or to harm, it all depends on the person using it. Religion is the same. The problem isn't with faith, it's with how people interpret and apply it. Suddenly, a student raised his hand. Doctor, may I ask something? Dr. Sadra managed a small smile. Of course. The student turned to Ada. If Islam is so logical, why do we still need faith? Why isn't knowledge and reason enough? Ada smiled. Because human reason is limited. Science can explain how the universe works, but it cannot explain why we are here. Science can tell us how the brain functions, but it cannot explain why we have consciousness and emotions. There are things beyond the reach of reason, and that is where faith comes in. The student nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Dr. Sadra looked at Ada again. So, according to you, faith does not mean rejecting logic? Ada shook her head. On the contrary, doctor. True faith and logic go hand in hand. Islam never asks us to believe without thinking. Instead, it constantly encourages us to reflect, question, and seek the truth. That's why the Qur'an repeatedly asks, do you not think? Do you not see? Dr. Sadra was silent for a long time, then, for the first time, he looked at Ada with genuine respect. I must admit, this has been an extraordinary debate. I did not expect to hear such compelling answers today. Some students started clapping, not to declare a winner, but because they had just witnessed a discussion that truly challenged their minds. Dr. Sadra smiled faintly. I won't say that I suddenly believe in God after this discussion, but you have given me something valuable, Ada, something that makes me want to reconsider my perspective. Maybe I've only been looking at one side of the argument, and forgetting that there's another side worth exploring. Ada's warm smile remained. That's more than enough, Doctor. The journey to truth isn't about reaching a final destination overnight. It's about having the willingness to seek with an open heart. Dr. Sadra nodded. Thank you, Ada. And thank you to all of you who listened. I hope this discussion doesn't just make us think, but also inspires us to seek truth honestly and openly. More students clapped, and as the class ended, several of them approached Ada, eager to ask her more questions. Many of them were not Muslims, but they now seemed genuinely curious to learn more. Meanwhile, Dr. Sadra remained standing at the front of the room, watching Ada with a newfound perspective. He no longer saw her as just another student. She had challenged his beliefs in a way he had never expected. And for the first time in years, a man who had long dismissed the idea of God as an illusion was beginning to wonder if he had been wrong all along. Moral lessons. 1. Faith and reason do not have to conflict. Islam encourages critical thinking and the pursuit of truth. 2. Truth cannot be forced, it must be sought with an open heart. Even an atheist can reconsider God's existence if they are willing to think honestly. 3. A good debate is not about winning or losing but about seeking truth. Ada didn't try to defeat Dr. Sadra, she invited him to think more deeply. 4. Islam is not just about doctrine, it is also about logic and wisdom. Its beauty can be understood by anyone who sincerely seeks knowledge. 5. A religion should not be judged by the actions of its followers. If some Muslims act wrongly, it is their fault, not the fault of Islam itself.